Persona 3 is a strange game. At the time of its release back in 2006, not many games could say they were a dungeon-crawling, dating, anime role-playing life simulator. Persona 3 was a departure from its contemporaries because of how it dabbled in numerous genres, separating it from the Final Fantasies and Dragon Quests while still maintaining some of the identity that made Persona, Persona. The thing that made Persona 3 such a success is how it somehow ties together all its seemingly unrelated aspects in such a subtle yet effective way. And although Persona 4 and 5 has since refined and perfected the day-to-day life sim dungeon crawling formula, Persona 3 laid the framework that made the obscene milking of Persona 4 and the massive success of Persona 5 possible. In lieu of Persona 5's great success and Persona 4's milking, Persona 3 is now being talked about less and less. There are lots of common complaints such as the lack of a definitive version, clunky mechanics, and strange pacing, but I still believe that Persona 3 is the best modern Persona game. A lot of it could be nostalgia talking, but in recently replaying the game, a lot of my opinions have been reinforced, and I've come to appreciate other aspects of the game as I've gotten older. Persona 3 does so much right in terms of its tone, world building, UI, soundtrack, theme, philosophical symbolism, and its implementation of life simulator mechanics. To most people I know, it's no secret that Persona 3 is one of my favorite games. I think it holds up 14 years later and is still an awesome game. I could ramble on for hours and hours about how great this game is, so to avoid that, I'll discuss the various points of the game's design in segments to keep things more focused. All that being said, let's take a look at what makes Persona 3 such an awesome game. Persona 3 instantly differentiates itself from games like Final Fantasy in that it doesn't take place in some fantasy world, but it opts for a more contemporary setting. This isn't really anything new for Persona or the Megami Tensei series as a whole, but Persona 3 executes it in a very appealing manner. Although Persona 3's story takes place in the seemingly mundane city of Tatsumiport Island, it does a fantastic job of establishing the city as a living, breathing place filled with people and places that could believably exist. It's the little things like eating a wild duck burger to increase your courage, hanging out with your annoying, horny friend who wants to date his teacher, or listening in on random conversations that you hear on the way to school that take Persona 3 from being another turn-based dungeon crawler JRPG to being Persona 3. What makes the world of Tatsumiport Island so amazing is how seamlessly your day-to-day actions there are integrated into Persona Fusion and combat. Social links add a feeling of reward and accomplishment that simply isn't there in a lot of JRPGs. Helping your friends with their daily struggles or realizing their dreams and gaining the ability to fuse some super powerful persona as a result feels good. A lot of the social link characters have compelling stories, and the rewards and benefits you gain from seeing those stories through helps to further integrate the daily life segments and Tartarus segments in an ingenious way. Persona 4 and 5 may have greatly improved upon this, but Persona 3 took a risk in implementing these mechanics, and they ended up laying a solid groundwork that the future games now stand upon. The reason that the mundane day life segments of Persona 3 feel so great is that they don't feel disjointed from the core experience. It isn't some side distraction from the main game, but an integral feature that enhances the overall Persona 3 experience and adds to the world and atmosphere of the game through the seamless integration of its gameplay mechanics in its world. That's not to say it's perfect by any means though. There's a couple of social links that are weaker than the others. Some social stats take an obscene amount of points to level up and serve little purpose outside of a few instances, and the dating aspect of social links is just downright stupid. Whenever you do one of the female social links, you automatically date them after a certain rank. Kinda weird, but not a huge deal. The problem is that the girls can also get jealous if you hang out with another girl, or they might get mad if you don't hang out with them after like 2 weeks. This makes max social link runs somewhat of an annoyance, and the problem could easily be mitigated by just letting you go the friend route in female social links. Although this problem's been fixed in Persona 4 onwards, it can be a bit of a headache going back to Persona 3. Even though there's a few weak social links and the girls can be a pain in the butt to deal with, the high points of Persona 3's life sim portion are nothing short of amazing. A particular high point that's worth mentioning in my opinion is Aki Inari's social link. I actually never did this social link in my first couple of playthroughs of the game, surprisingly, but his social link perfectly captures the core theme of Persona 3. Aki Inari is a young man who's dying of a genetic illness. His social link primarily focuses on him finding meaning in his life and coming to terms with his impending death. Towards the end of his social link, he begins writing a story about a pink crocodile and a bird that's pretty damn depressing, but he gives you the finished story when you max him out, and then he just disappears. On March 4th, when you're able to talk to all your social links before the end of the game, you can meet with Aki Inari's mother and discover that he's passed away. This is an absolutely gut-wrenching scene, and it's the only time a video game has ever made me cry. Now, it might seem like I'm rambling, but there's a point in all of this. Persona 3 uses the recurring locales as a backdrop for its minor social link characters to act out their struggles. Moments like Aki Inari coming to terms with his impending death serves as a parallel to Persona 3's themes of death and mortality. The lifesim elements of Persona 3 integrate not only with the gameplay, but also the central thematic of the game. There may be some low lows in Persona 3 social links, but the highs are among some of the best in the series. You start to associate silly locations like Wild Duck Burger with helping Maiko process her parents' divorce, or places like the Naganaki Shrine where you pray to unreversed social links with Aki Inari's struggle with mortality. You start to tie these locations with specific memories, much like you would with locations in real life. Persona 3's world is interesting because you're not in some generic high fantasy or cyberpunk setting, but you're just some random high schooler who gets into hijinks with his buddies at places that might as well be real. The world of Tatsumi Port Island is believable because it feels relatable. It feels like a place where you could be living out your high school days, hanging out with your friends, and experiencing life struggles. Look, I'm not some kind of SMT elitist who's gonna sit here and tell you that Persona 5 is some easy baby shit, but Persona 5 is some easy baby shit. The most common complaint about Persona 5 is that even on Merciless, the game can become kind of a joke. Sure, there may be some challenging sections, but given the fact that the Twin Warden's Confidant gives you the ability to fuse personas of any level for a bit of the end pretty early on, the game becomes pretty easy to cheese your way through. Persona 4 is definitely hard for the first few dungeons, but once you get your first Almighty spell, the game is pretty much over. You can use Almighty spells to endlessly farm Golden Hands, which gives you an obscene amount of SP, making the game pretty much a joke. Persona 3 may not be the hardest game of all time, but make no mistake about it, it can be pretty damn hard. Persona 3 comes from the SMT Nocturne era of Atlas game design, and is definitely more difficult than Persona 4 and 5, although Persona 3 is a bit easier than Nocturne and comes with less PTSD.
Ah! What just happened? This motherfucker healed him for the max!
Persona 3's combat uses a version of the press turn system, which was first introduced in Nocturne and has been used in most S&T and Persona games since. The basic principle is that enemies have weaknesses that can be exploited. If you hit their weakness or get a critical hit, you gain an extra turn. If done right, the system allows you to take down the enemy in one turn cycle without ever being hit. On the other hand, you and your party members also have affinities and weaknesses that need to be accounted for, since the enemies can also take full advantage of the system. Personally, I find this system really cool because it's pretty well balanced and allows you to abuse the game's combat, but it prevents itself from being too easy by allowing enemies access to the same set of tools. On Persona 4 and 5, I never felt much urgency if the enemy got a preemptive strike on me. In Persona 3, a preemptive strike from the enemy can ultimately result in your death in seconds flat. Something I really appreciate about Persona 3 is that, although the combat is somewhat bare bones compared to the likes of Persona 5, the difficulty requires you to strategize and put thought into a lot of the battles. At least until you get Hell and Satan with Spellmaster and just spam Armageddon to kill everything. Persona 3's biggest challenge definitely lies in the Tartarus boss fights. The full moon bosses that occur every month to push the plot forward are hilariously easy, but the shadows you find at different checkpoints in Tartarus require a decent amount of strategy and make you really think. Bosses like the Sleeping Table and Change Relic still pose a great challenge after multiple playthroughs, and almost always take me multiple attempts without fail. That being said, Persona 3 is still a very accessible game. It isn't baby's first RPG by any means, and I wouldn't recommend it as your first, but if you've ever played something like Pokemon or even Persona 5, Persona 3 is challenging enough to give you a hard time, but is also accessible enough for you to properly learn and adapt to it. The game is challenging by itself, but your mileage can vary depending on what version of the game you play. This is typically where most people diverge on what the definitive edition of Persona 3 is. There's two groups of people. People who prefer Persona 3 FES and people who prefer Persona 3 Portable. Both of them are solid versions of Persona 3, but they come with their own advantages and disadvantages. Persona 3 FES is an expanded version of the original Persona 3, sporting a decent number of content additions and minor enhancements. FES's primary strength is in the overall presentation of the game, which definitely matters. The overworld is still depicted with 3D models and there's anime cutscenes, but you can't directly control your party members. The problem with this is that the poor AI can make the game harder than it already is, and it can turn into a Mitsuru Marin Karen spam fuckfest very quickly. It also has the answer. I'll let you decide as to whether or not that's a plus. Persona 3 Portable, on the other hand, forgoes anime cutscenes entirely, and you traverse the world with a cursor as opposed to with 3D models. This is fine and all, but can also detract from some of the more dramatic narrative moments. On the other hand, you also have full control over your party members, which makes strategizing against enemies and basic combat far more enjoyable. You also have the choice to play as a girl, which provides a surprisingly different experience from the base game. Even if you prefer FES, it's definitely worth picking up Portable for the female route if you want something fresh for a second playthrough. Both versions are solid choices, but there's actually another very solid method of playing the game. If you have a decent PC, you can install a mod on PCSX2 for FES that allows you to control your party. If you're a member of the PC Master Race and don't mind emulators, this is also a very solid choice and is the best way to play in my opinion, but I can understand people saying that this doesn't count since it's not an official method of playing, so pick whichever one sounds most appealing to you. Beyond just combat, Persona Fusion is a very big part of the game, for better or for worse. After you win a battle, you have a chance of getting something called Shuffle Time. Shuffle Time lets you get things like weapons, money, and new personas. You can use these personas for fusion by taking them to a man with a long nose and putting them together in varying combinations. Not everyone will enjoy this aspect of the game, but honestly, I prefer it over Pokemon's Capture and Evolve system. Combining weaker personas into more powerful personas and inheriting all the skills I want is an addictive process, and I always spend numerous hours of each playthrough in the Velvet Room alone. This is also where the life sim aspect of the game ties in. All your social links are tied to a specific arcana. The arcana can best be compared to something like Pokemon typings, only they don't really share strengths or weaknesses. The higher the level of your social link of, say, the Fortune Arcana is, the more bonus XP you'll get when fusing a persona of the Fortune Arcana. Additionally, when you max out a social link, you'll be able to fuse an ultimate persona of that Arcana. This is a really cool feature and adds a tangible benefit to social links beyond involving yourself with side stories and makes for a smart integration of the social and combat mechanics. The only real problem with Fusion is that you can't select the skills you want to inherit like you can in 4 and 5, so it takes a lot of soft resets to get good personas. It isn't a deal breaker by any means, but more of a minor inconvenience. In fact, most of Persona 3's issues in terms of gameplay can be boiled down to that of minor inconvenience. The social links can be a little annoying to deal with because of the girls going reverse if you aren't careful, and Fusion is a little less intuitive than later titles in the series, but if you disregard the quality of life changes made in other games, Persona 3's gameplay is fantastic. Given that something like this was never really tried before back in 2006, Atlus hit it out of the park with Persona 3. Persona 5 may have things like the Baton Pass and streamlined fusion, but I prefer Persona 3 because of its approach to difficulty and how well balanced it is. I feel like Persona 5 suffers from the fact that enemies don't have access to things like the Baton Pass, and I've come to appreciate Persona 3 that much more because of it. Persona 3 is a good example of less is more. I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect by any means, but its relative simplicity compared to 5 makes for a stronger core gameplay experience in my eyes. Something that's very central to Persona's identity is its focus on philosophy. Persona 3's philosophical motif is established right from the game's intro cutscene, Memento Mori, a phrase that's plastered all over the intro which translates from Latin to something like, remember you must die. Memento Mori is a philosophical term that can be traced back to philosophers such as Socrates and serves as a reminder of our mortality, something that all humans must face. Mortality and death are topics that are covered heavily in Persona 3, and they are central to many of the characters' growth and development arcs over the course of the plot. Given its theme, Persona 3 should be a dark and dreary game, and at times, it is. Even during the first cutscene when the protagonist first arrives to the dorm, there's a lot of bizarre and crazy shit happening. While music is blasting in the protagonist's ears, there's a girl who is seemingly attempting suicide, and eventually the streets are filled with blood and coffins as the protagonist approaches the dorm. The world seems to be a gloomy place filled with mystery and intrigue, but not everything is as it seems. A lot of these things are explained later, but this intro cutscene sets the tone perfectly. Things seem dark and oppressive, but there's something else lying underneath. Persona 3 is a game filled with tragedy and death at every turn. But it's not a game about death in and of itself. Persona 3 is really a game about life, what it means to be human, and accepting that your time here is limited. Through the deaths of their loved ones, the main cast are able to grow and evolve, illustrating death as being a beginning instead of an end. To die is a part of living, and Persona 3 is a story about accepting that. Through Shinji's death at the hands of Takaya, Akihiko is able to find new resolve, and Ken is able to find new meaning in life. Through Chidori's death, Junpei learns to value his life and appreciate the lives of others, and acknowledge that he's not living for just himself anymore. Through her father's death, Mitsuru is able to realize that she isn't alone and she has a reason to fight. And even through Aki Inari's death, his mother is able to learn that you should love people while they're here and value them while they're alive. Memento Mori ties heavily into Persona 3 because being human means dying. But Persona 3 is also a game about celebrating life. Persona 3 is so compelling because it tackles a theme that is central to what it means to be human. It's able to so closely capture and emulate the human experience and creates a shockingly relatable narrative about the realities of life and death that everyone has to face. Because of its setup and themes, Persona 3 isn't overly anime about its plot, and it can get surprisingly real at times. Another thing that Persona 3 does really well from a thematic standpoint is its use of Greek mythology as a means of conveying the story through more subliminal means. This can be seen with the personas of the main characters, such as the protagonist Orpheus or Junpei's Hermes, but I think it's utilized perfectly for the story of Akihiko and Shinji. Akihiko's persona is Polydeuces, and Shinji's persona is Castor, both of which are brothers in Greek mythology. Polydeuces' father was Zeus, making him immortal, while Castor's father is human, making him mortal. There's a beautiful symmetry between the myth and the story of the game, and their respective personas serve as a subtle piece of foreshadowing that really makes Shinji's death hit harder if you know the story behind the myth. The focus on philosophy and the small details regarding things such as persona backstories really serve to enhance the plot of the game, and add a lot to its profound effect if you take more time to closely inspect the finer details of Persona 3. All in all, its thematic topics and symbolic elements make for a compelling and profound story that never gets old no matter how many times I play it, and the ending never fails to get me in my feels. I saved one of my favorite parts for last. Persona 3 soundtrack was composed by one of my all-time favorite composers, Shoji Meguro. Anytime you see his name on an OST, it's bound to have some heat. I definitely consider Persona 3 to be some of his best work, and that's saying a lot since the SMT Nocturne and Persona 4 soundtracks have a lot of great tracks on them. The soundtrack is very much a product of its time, but it's also aged extremely well. The jazz, J-pop fusion combined with some of the vocals from Lotus Juice make for some of the most memorable tracks I've ever heard in a game. Tracks like Iwatodai Dorm set this happy and upbeat tone, while tracks like The Battle for Everyone's Souls give off this fight to save the world vibe. There's a track to suit every mood, and overall, the soundtrack is pretty bangin'. I also really like how they swap out the town and school tracks at certain points in the game to fit the current mood of the plot. One of my favorite points in the game is after summer vacation, because during school, they start playing Changing Seasons, which is one of my favorite tracks from any video game. I also really like how they play Living with Determination and Memories of the City in the last month of the game to give off that depressing, the world is about to end vibe. And, of course, there's also the classic Mass Destruction featuring vocals from Lotus Juice, who I think is criminally underused in later Persona games, and it really gets me pumped for random encounters. Hearing for the millionth time might get somewhat grating after a while, but Mass Destruction is a banger nonetheless. And last but not least, we have the masterpiece Burn My Dread, which plays in the opening cutscene of the game. Burn My Dread is an awesome song that fits perfectly with the opening cinematic, and the final battle version of it goes just as hard. And I honestly couldn't think of a better song to start and end your journey in Persona 3. Burn My Dread is actually a good example of one of the musical motifs that Persona 3 establishes. Like many other Atlus games, Persona 3 makes use of recurring melodies and elements in a couple of songs to put a certain narrative or emotional emphasis on particular moments. Not only does the intro cinematic have Burn My Dread playing, but the opening of the game has the protagonist listening to a different arrangement of Burn My Dread through his headphones. This particular arrangement is only used in the game's opening cutscene and in the final battle against Death, and it's really cool because it makes the game feel like it's coming full circle. Another musical motif that the game establishes can be seen in 4 of its tracks: Joy, Memories of the School, Memories of the City, and Memories of You. Joy is a very happy and upbeat song that plays in a lot of the social link events and serves to be kind of like an everyday life theme. Memories of the School is a song that's a perfect juxtaposition to Joy. It plays during one of the saddest scenes in the game, and although it has the same melody as Joy, it has a very bittersweet feel to it. The recurring melody gives off a nostalgic vibe and really makes you look back at the memories you've made with Persona 3. Memories of the City also has a very similar juxtaposition to it and serves as a replacement to Moon Reaching Stars in January, and it also serves as a goodbye to Tatsumi Port Island and all the memories you've made there. The common elements shared between these songs ends off in the track Kimi no Kyoku, or Memories of You, which plays during the credits. This song gives me chills every time I hear it, and it really encapsulates Persona 3 and everything it is. Its recurring melody along with the bittersweet lyrics drive home this feeling of longing and the desire to look back at past memories. It has this intense nostalgic vibe to it, but it also gives off a certain kind of closure to the game, and it really does a great job of closing the game off with a bang. And don't even get me started on the new OST that was made for the female route of Persona 3 Portable. Way of Life, wiping all out time. My god, they really overdid it here. The amount of time they put into the female protagonist, especially in the new soundtrack, really shows, and it paid off big time. The soundtrack here illustrates the very different personality of the female protagonist. Where the male protagonist is apathetic, socially inept, and dejected, the female protagonist is vibrant, upbeat, and colorful. Although its themes and core elements stay the same, the soundtrack almost makes you feel like you're playing a different game. Persona 3 Portable is a testament to how much of a dedicated, versatile, and passionate musician Shoji Meguro is. At the end of the day, Persona 3 is a fantastic game, but Shoji Meguro's music is a massive part of its identity, and it really wouldn't be the same game without his amazing soundtracks. This video probably makes it sound like I hate Persona 5. My $90 Phantom Thieves edition of Persona 5 Royal would beg to differ, but that's neither here nor there. Persona 5 is a solid game, and I love that the Persona franchise has seen mass success, even if it's at the cost of mainline Shin Megami Tensei. Don't get me wrong, I hate it as much as the next guy. I mean, come on, the last time we got news on SMT 5, I was like 14. But that aside, Persona 4 and 5 are solid games, but they also owe a lot to Persona 3 for laying a strong foundation to build upon. The bizarre anime dungeon crawler life sim Frankenstein that is Persona 3, yeah, it's strange, there's no doubt about it, but being normal is just playing it safe, and nothing was ever interesting or successful by playing it safe. It may be plagued with minor inconveniences, but Persona 3 took risks and produced a fantastic game that was unlike anything else that had hit the market at the time. In a couple years, I think Persona 3 will definitely become one of the Final Fantasy VIIs or Chrono Triggers because it dared to be something different and succeeded at it. Persona 3 may have caused a split in the mainline S&T and Persona fanbases, but it's an amazing game regardless. Its engaging gameplay, well-implemented life sim mechanics, thought-provoking story, and fantastic soundtrack weave together into one of the most compelling game experiences I've ever played. Persona 4 and 5 have improved lots of Persona 3's mechanics, but that doesn't mean it's outdated. It might be somewhat difficult to go back to at times, and it might even have some frustrating moments, but it also has a charming simplicity that keeps me coming back. If Persona 3 wasn't so good, Persona 5 could never have been so successful and gone on to sell 3.2 million copies. There might still be arguments over whether Persona 4 is better than 3 or if this waifu is better than that waifu, but when it comes down to it, most people will agree that Persona 3 is still awesome.